Politics Aside. My name is John Porter, and we appreciate you joining us again today for a very special edition, Thanksgiving edition of 2022. I really believe today is we have a very timely topic, but also timeless topic. And if many of you heard me say in the past, the purpose of having Politics Aside is for individuals, real people, that have real information in a very timely manner, talk to our friends from around the country, if not around the world. And this is our 10th Politics Aside. For those that haven't been following us, from topics regarding Ukraine, we've talked about polling. What does it really mean? We've talked about music and the blues. We've had a number of authors, very special guest authors on a number of different topics. And we look forward to having additional guests. And we are open for any ideas or suggestions. If you have some topics you'd like us to cover, please let us know. Again, very timely, Politics Aside, going into Thanksgiving of 2022. And I'd like to really take a moment and recognize all of our friends and family from around the country, if not from around the world, on this very special day where we say thank you to, again, our family and friends, our colleagues, experts such as our guests today, and certainly our staff with the Porter Group, but also all the elected officials that we work with across the country on all levels of government and the administration. Also want to take a moment and recognize my brother who passed away this past week. Great father, loving husband, uncle to my children, and certainly very close to me with over 60 years of Thanksgiving. So as we say thanks, please say thanks to your friends and family as well. Again, Politics Aside was put together with the purpose of having you sit back, relax, and enjoy topics of interest. All I ask is that you relax and enjoy and send us information that you would like us to cover in the future. Also, today, as I mentioned, we have a special guest, Dr. Roger Cryan. Timely in the sense that we're going into Thanksgiving, and Dr. Cryan is Chief Economist with the American Farm Bureau to discuss costs of Thanksgiving, the cost of food, delivery, trends, and what we're going to see moving into 23. But before we get into the facts and figures, I thought we'd take a moment and talk turkey. We have to talk about turkeys, and we need to talk about Thanksgiving. But for those that aren't aware, when it comes to turkeys, this all started in about 1621, where it wasn't just turkeys, it was poultry. And some of you that, and I promise I wasn't alive in 1800, I feel like it at times, but an author, Sarah Hale, you may have heard of, she pushed heavily to have the Thanksgiving. And she actually was the author of Mary Had a Little Lamb, and it was in the early 1800s. And then it became a national holiday by President Lincoln in 1863. And then Congress actually passed it in 1885. So to our friends in New England who have brought us this very special day and recognizing, of course, Thanksgiving, with all of the pumpkin pies and certainly all the cranberries. But the last thing before we get into like the real issues here when we're talking turkey, for those that may know that Ben Franklin tried really hard to make the turkey the national bird. That was, of course, in competition with the eagle plus a number of others. And Congress, in its infinite wisdom, decided to put a committee together of Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Ben Franklin. Let's have a committee, right? So actually, Ben Franklin tried really hard to make sure that the turkey was our national bird. Now, they actually brought in a third party, welcome to Congress, whatever century, to decide that there was an eagle would become our symbol of freedom in the United States. So we've had turkey ice cream, turkey pizza, turkey burritos, turkey sandwiches. And in fact, the White House since 1947 have been recognizing turkeys. And thanks to President Kennedy and President Reagan, they started this pardoning, which we had just recently by pardoning 2 turkeys at the Willard Hotel in Washington, D.C. this past Sunday. chocolate, and chip. So with that, one more time, Dr. Cryan, it's an honor to have you here today. You're the chief economist for one of the premier organizations in the world, American Farm Bureau. And I mentioned to the doctor earlier, I grew up in Iowa. So I grew up with the Farm Bureau most every day of my life, although I wasn't privileged to be growing up on a farm, but certainly understand the importance. Since 1987, you've been doing surveys, and that's on the cost of Thanksgiving. But with almost 6 million members, 100 plus years old, I thought it was really germane for you to be with us today. So, Doctor, can we talk about your annual study first? Since 1987, the Farm Bureau survey shows Thanksgiving dinner costs up 20%. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Thanks for having me, John. We've been doing, like you said, we've been doing this for 37 years now. It's become a tradition at the Farm Bureau. It is not a scientific study. It is an informal survey. Our members go out all over the country. They go to stores. They collect prices they see. They go online these days in some cases. So we ended up with prices from all 50 states and Puerto Rico, because of course we have affiliate members in all 50 states and Puerto Rico. And they collected prices for a 12-item Thanksgiving basket for 10 people, and like you said, it was up 20% to about $64.05. That's $10.74 higher than what we collected last year. That was the highest increase in the 37 years we've been doing the survey. And it came on top of a 14% increase last year, so that's quite an increase in 2 years. And yet, adjusted for inflation, this year's Thanksgiving dinner basket is less than it was in 1987, which just goes to show what a wonderful system we have for providing people affordable.
Doctor, let's walk through that again. Explain. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but in reality, it really has decreased in costs based upon inflation, or
adjusted for the consumer price index.
Yes.
The core, not the core, but the headline consumer price index the BLS uses is the primary measure of inflation over time. If you adjust for that, the dinner, the same set of items for a classic Thanksgiving turkey dinner, it costs less now than it did in 1987.
Well, that's because of the great efforts of the Farm Bureau, then, right?
Because of our members, absolutely. Farmers are getting better all the time. They're more efficient. They're better all the time, and it takes a couple of percent of the population to feed the rest of us. And we're really blessed to live in a country where Americans pay a smaller share of their income for their food than any people anywhere in the world. And that's a real blessing.
If we can take a moment, I guess, first back to my Iowa roots. Again, I remember people saying that we don't need farmers, we buy our groceries at Safeway. And of course, that rings true today. A lot of people don't quite understand it. But can you talk about the farmer and rancher of today? What some of their challenges in providing us the safest and best food in the world?
Well, they face some of the same challenges that they've always faced, which is weather uncertainty, price uncertainty. I mean, most of us, if somebody offered us a job where we had to lay out all our savings and then take a salary that goes up and down by 50% or more every year, just randomly based on market conditions, I don't think a lot of us would be excited about that. But we've got a whole class of men and women who couldn't see themselves doing anything else except farming, and they deal with price volatility, they deal with weather issues. They deal with price volatility, not just for what they sell, but for the things they buy, the fertilizer and the fuel. And this has been a tough year on paper. farmers are having a good year. But whether or not a farmer had a good year depended on an awful lot of different things, because prices for grain, for example, have gone way up and came way back down again. So what you got for your corn or your wheat really depended on when you sold your corn or your wheat. The price you paid for fertilizer really depends on when you booked it, when you booked the purchases. If you bought them last fall, if you did okay. If you bought it this spring when it was time to apply, you paid through the nose. How your weather turned out, there was drought in many parts of the U.S. this year, very, very, very bad drought in a lot of places. Other places saw great growing weather. So, how good a year you have depended on when you pull the trigger on some things, and that was really more a matter of luck than anything else. That's one of the reasons why the Farm Bill is such a critical thing to have, so that we've got basic protections for the kind of risks that farmers face every year, so that they can get through from one year to the next. We can talk a lot about long-term value and long-term returns, but if you can't make it through this year to produce again next year, everybody loses.
So it really is year to year for a lot of our friends in the farming community.
It really is.
So from the production standpoint, of course, again, my friends that are in the farming industry, I mean, they many times over 24/7, as you mentioned, watching the weather, watching the costs, watching, what is the cost of diesel? What does it mean if there's a railroad strike? And of course, those things are still kind of out there, the cost of fuel and the potential of a rail strike, right?
Those certainly are big deals right now. The diesel price is extremely high, and farmers rely heavily on diesel to run their equipment, to for the trucks that bring them their fertilizer and their seed and anything else that they need, for the trucks that haul their products to market, and not just the trucks, but the diesel engines on the railroads. The diesel engines on the barges, all running on diesel. So a high diesel price has a big impact on farmers every way you cut it.
So from, I guess, production costs and even back to our friends that are in the turkey business, there's also a loss because of different diseases, avian flu and different things with the poultry business and with the turkey. There's loss of millions every year, right? From different reasons.
Well, not every year. There's years that we don't really have an impact, and there's years that are problematic. This was a bad year for avian influenza. The bad news is it came and it went through pretty much all the wildfowl waterways, the Atlantic, Central, and Pacific. There were flocks affected in a number of different places. The good news is we have a robust animal health system. When cases were detected in the flock was taken away, so to speak, and every bird that arrives on the shelf is a healthy bird. It put a dent in production. It delayed production in some cases, so it may be a little harder to find a 40-pound bird or a 25-pound bird than it has been in previous years, but you're not going to have a hard time finding a 10 or 15-pound bird. The list prices were up. Our survey was done in late October, probably before an awful lot of the specials kicked in. I think folks that are looking this week are going to find reasonable prices. Folks that looked last week that had time to thaw a frozen turkey, I think found some really good prices. But I've seen folks, I've talked to folks who've paid as little as 37 cents or 45 cents per pound for a turkey this month. So there are bargains out there when you go looking for it. And I think a lot of folks are going to be doing a lot more bargain hunting generally with inflation. I think a lot of folks don't remember, as I do, in the 70s, it was a standard thing to go to 3 or 4 different supermarkets to price compare, just to make sure you did your best to deal with inflation. I think there'll be a lot more of that going on in the coming years.
Well, as maybe even a little older vintage than yourself, I can remember my parents doing that. Also, I think we were paying 20 cents a gallon for fuel. Things that, of course, have changed, but I am, I'm acutely aware of the importance of Thanksgiving as a holiday, and as I mentioned in my opening, it really is one of my favorite holidays. But as I was reading through your survey and realizing you've been doing this so long, and with the breadth of information and knowledge that you work with at the Bureau, is the Farm Bureau a government agency? Sometimes people ask me, they hear the name American Farm Bureau. Is it a government agency?
No, it's good. I appreciate you asking me that. It's I've been asked the same thing. Folks hear Farm Bureau. Bureau sounds like a government agency, like the Federal Bureau of Investigation or some other government. It is not. It is it's a private organization. It was formed over 100 years ago. The American Farm Bureau Federation was founded in 1923 by representatives from various state farm bureaus. It was really a movement, and it is the largest. We think it may be the largest general agricultural organization in the world, with 6 million members. Not all of those are farmers, but an awful lot of farmers belong to Farm Bureau, and we represent the voice of agriculture here in D.C. There's so many things going on that affect farmers. An awful lot of the commodity organizations get very focused on things that are very specific to their organizations, to their commodity. We try to deal with everything. We try to address everything, all the policies that affect farmers, and that's why we look more closely at things like farm credit and the farm bill generally. I mean, we look at every aspect of the farm bill in order to try to get the best deal for farmers as a whole, because supporting farmers is really, in many ways, the best way to support everybody, because without the production of farmers, we're really up a creek.
So, as you may know, our office is about 50 yards from the Capitol. It's an 1880, row house here on Capitol Hill, and we watch closely, listen closely, and are engaged on a daily basis, sometimes 24/7, as I know you are. And you're literally in the shadow. You're near the White House, so you're also very close. With the influence that you have with that size of an organization, it appears to me that you're one of the more bipartisan organizations. The Farm Bill is critical, and the Farm Bill itself is fairly bipartisan, correct?
Absolutely. The Farm Bill is maybe the last bastion of bipartisanship in Congress. It's been a bipartisan agreement year after year for quite some time. There's something in it for a lot of different groups. It's one of the reasons why we think it's important to keep the food assistance, the nutrition programs, tied to the farm programs, because it's the best way to build that coalition. It's got to work for everybody, or it's not going to happen.
So if I may, again, on your influence internationally as well, what are some of the other key white papers and studies that you think people would be interested in that they could turn to on your website, or some of the things that you've authored?
Well, we do all kinds of stuff. The Farm Bureau website is easy to remember. It's fb.org. There's a wide variety of things on there that our press releases. Our Thanksgiving study was a press release. We also produce my team of economists here, my outstanding team of economists here, do regular papers we call market intel papers. And if you go to our website and look at under latest market intel, you'll find everything we've done for the last, I think probably we've been doing those for about 5 years. And we cover a very wide range of issues, including the kind of things you expect, like what's going on with the crop markets or livestock markets. A lot of things are keyed off major statistical announcements. And other times we address policy. We are trying to put together reports on a wide variety of farm bill issues, and issues like transportation, rail issues, and barge issues, and shipping issues. All these things that affect farmers' bottom line, whether it's in the market or here in Washington. And one of the things we've been looking at pretty closely, and that I've been writing about is inflation, which is having a terrible impact and is going to have a terrible impact, both because inflation itself is robbing every farmer and consumer in the country by eroding the value of everything we have and earn, and because the approach that the Federal Reserve Bank is taking to fixing the inflation is raising interest rates, which is increasing the costs of everything that we have to borrow for. And farmers
and possibly discouraging investment in product or in equipment and expansion, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's the half of it. I mean, the discouragement of investment is one thing. Farmers, as I said, they deal with a lot of volatility from year to year, and it's very uncommon for a farmer not to have to borrow at some point over the course of just a few years. So when a farmer gets in a situation where they have a succession issue, or that neighboring piece of land comes on the market for a once in a lifetime opportunity, and they've got there's just an absolute need to renovate or expand. If they've got to borrow and they have to pay what's now a 7% interest rate, long term, the 30-year mortgage rate now is 7%. Just a couple of years ago, it was around 3%. And there's a lot of concern it's going to go higher because the Fed keeps raising rates, and there's some inflationary expectations built in. So when you have to borrow at those kinds of rates, it really has an impact. It creates a situation where your debt servicing costs are 2 or 3 times what they were just a couple of years ago, and if the market turns on you, and if the higher rates are depressing land values, you can end up underwater. You can end up, even if inflation gets fixed, just like what happened in the 1980s. Farmers can end up with debt that they're paying enormous interest rates on, that their returns are coming from prices that are not being inflated with inflation like they had been when they borrowed, and all of a sudden they're underwater and they can't refinance. So one of the things that's going to be a big issue over the next 5 or 10 years is credit, and how credit could be managed to help keep farmers afloat when macroeconomic circumstances are conspiring to dunk them underwater.
2 other topics, although probably not inclusive, because there's a lot of things we can talk about. But how much should we be paying attention to what's happening in Ukraine and with the food supply in Europe, and how that impacts us here in the U.S.? A lot of people say that's not my problem, that's another part of the world. So is that something that we should be paying attention to?
I think we've been very fortunate for the last 40 years in growth in agricultural production around the world. And that has been for a number of reasons. And some things that were one-offs that we don't appreciate were one-offs. We've had growth in productivity. We've had a lot of good science. We've also had some things like Chinese market reforms that have led to China being the world's leading agricultural producer in terms of value of production. That's a shocker for a lot of folks. We had in the 1970s, the Soviet Union couldn't feed itself. They had to import grain to feed their population. Today, Russia and Ukraine and some of the other countries in the former Soviet Union are bread baskets to the world, and they've so we've had some events that have really made it possible to grow production rapidly over the last 4 decades. And this invasion of Ukraine, which disrupted a lot of things all at once, it disrupted fuel, fertilizer, food markets all at once. Should be a wake-up call. Some of the ways it's affected us directly. when the invasion first happened, there was a the grain markets were interrupted. Russia and Ukraine together produced an awful lot of grain. There was an expectation initially that all that grain might be lost to the market. They produce a very large share of world grain exports. That wasn't quite the case. Russia has continued to export because we don't really want to use food as a weapon. We don't want to sanction Russian grain when all that will do is starve people in Africa and the Middle East. But that disrupted markets, and grain markets went very high. Prices doubled in the middle of 2022, and then they came back down as people started to realize that grain was moving out of Russia, that other markets were bumping up production, and as they arrived at an agreement to start moving grain out of Ukraine, that's helped as well. So the grain markets are maybe not way beyond what they would be without some of the other, in the context of some of the other effects. But the biggest effect, the biggest impact, and again, fertilizer exports from those countries have been disrupted from Belarus and Ukraine and Russia, but not as much as they might have been. The big issue is energy. The Russians supply Europe with an awful lot of their natural gas. And when that's been disrupted, as it has been, natural gas prices, not entirely disrupted, but largely disrupted, natural gas prices in Europe have gotten very high. And the thing that affects, beyond just generally raising energy costs, that's had a big impact in Europe because the European nitrogen fertilizer plants have shut down. Natural gas is a major element in the production process for nitrogen fertilizer. And 40 to 60% of the nitrogen fertilizer capacity in Europe shut down this year because of the high cost, because it didn't pencil out to produce fertilizer with the natural gas prices that high. Their conclusion as individual firms was we should just buy it somewhere else. But when you cut into production like that, what happens is you have rich folks in Europe able to buy fertilizer from other markets and essentially severely cut into the supplies that are available to other countries that aren't in the same position to afford that.
Doctor, aren't some of those challenges they're having, they're challenges that we are having or may well have more of going into the winter with energy challenges in the Northeast and energy production? We're experiencing some of the same.
Well, natural gas is a lot cheaper if you can pipe it in from the wells, like the Europeans were doing from Russia. One of the reasons I think it's my understanding that, for example, that gas is expensive in New England because they don't let the pipelines get all the way up there. You've got pipelines that go from all kinds of fuel pipelines that come north from Texas and so forth into Virginia, and that helps. I mean, it matters how you move stuff. And if Europe is relying on liquid natural gas coming into capacities, they've got limited storage capacity, they've got limited port capacity. It cuts into the supply, and so they're a little more challenged than we are. We've been just as we've been blessed with our food system, we've been blessed to find new ways of extracting natural gas from the ground here in the U.S. North America is pretty well self-sufficient in energy and in fertilizer, thanks to our fertilizer production in Canada. We have a lot of advantages here that the Europeans don't have. But it is a world market. Energy prices are high and food prices are high. It's one of the reasons that we've emphasized this year that folks talk about food security. There was a lot of discussion here in town recently about hunger, and in America, hunger is a question of making sure folks have the resources to buy what they need. But we always have enough food in the country. Hunger as a global issue is really more about making sure there's enough production, because there are parts of the world that rely heavily on an adequate production, and that fertilizer that comes out of Russia and China and Ukraine and North America that serves markets like Brazil and Central Africa. That's critical to maintaining those food supplies. That's one of the reasons why fertilizer is also a product that we don't impose sanctions on, because it's just starving somebody else to make a point. Starving. It would be party A starving party C to make a point to party B. So food and fertilizer, we don't post sanctions on.
So on that topic, and fascinating how you explained it, that we have ample resources here. It's the cost and delivery. Again, whereas the world may be a total production issue. As you know, there is a school of thought I mentioned earlier when it comes to Ukraine that some people think, well, that's not our problem around the world. But Farm Bureau has taken a lead, correct, in helping with the issues of hunger, supporting some of these nations, and at least the production around the world.
I think that we have a philosophical belief in supporting productive agriculture and policies around the world that allow for both for free trade and for the use of the tools that are needed to make sure that production keeps growing, so that the world has enough. We support well regulated biotech. We support other countries, providing the same access to those technologies, or to food produced with those technologies. I met one of the pleasures of my professional career was to meet Norman Borlaug when he spoke to the USDA Ag Outlook Forum. He won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970 because he was the father of the Green Revolution. He opened up technologies that allowed for people to eat, for millions to eat. And when he spoke at that meeting, he talked about how incredibly important it is to make sure we're using the tools we have to keep production going. That we use the biotech that will allow us to keep raising yields and keep increasing the productivity of our ag lands, because population is still growing, and it's, according to the projections they've been putting out lately, it looks like it's going to be growing for another 30 years or so. So we've got to find ways to produce. There's a lot of folks. Europe has laid out plans for their efforts to support the environment by cutting back on agricultural production. That's really counterproductive. I've said to a whole lot of folks, we can talk about farming better, because I don't know a farmer that doesn't want to farm better, but don't talk about farming less, because that doesn't help anybody.
Well, as we, again, celebrate this very special week of saying thanks to our friends, certainly thanks to the American farmer, the families, to the corporations that are providing us some of the safest and some of the most food in the world. I'd like to, as we're concluding, bring it back to this week, and of course the emphasis that you have put on your survey that we talked a lot about a little bit earlier. What is you're an expert, so your crystal ball on what you see happening for food prices, delivery, supply chain going into 23. What do you think, Doctor, is going to be happening as we look into 23 and Thanksgiving 23?
Well, it'll look like everything's more expensive because inflation will continue in 2023. Food prices, I have to imagine, won't keep rising faster than inflation next year. There ought to be some settling down, but that, one of the difficulties in recent years of forecasting, and I've told a lot of folks this 3 years ago. If you asked me to talk about forecasts 3 years ago, I'd mostly be looking at market factors and supply and demand and pricing and how investments coming along, things like that. But the last 3 years has been so much turmoil, so many strange things happening between the pandemic and the war in Ukraine. and the sort of honestly the policies of the Federal Reserve Bank, things that have turned things upside down in ways that make it make a lot harder to figure out what's coming. And it's been kind of tough to figure out what's coming next, because we've had international tensions, and there's just a lot of things going on that makes it hard to project. But I would expect next year, I would hope next year would be a little more settled. I would expect prices for next year to be more or less where they are now, if there's no other unexpected disruption. But over time, it's going to be important to keep growing production. It's going to be important to maintain trade agreements, to make sure that free trade is pursued as a means of making sure that things need to get where they need to get.
I'm sorry, but what I hear you saying is that it likely will remain. Some of the costs likely won't go down, but maybe income will go up, and it will remain constant. Possibly the cost of food and of delivery.
I think, like I said, nominal food prices will go up because inflation is rising.
As long as it rises, yes.
Yeah, and people's ability to pay for it will depend on how incomes respond. Whether companies or whoever is increasing incomes to match that. It's a tough time. Usually, it's a tough adjustment. With some luck, we may have some settling of inflation by late 2024. I would say
that sounds like 2 years, right?
Yeah, well, I can't. I mean, it'll taper off. I think it's going to be substantial through next year, and then it'll be tapering off through 2024. That seems consistent with the analysis of economists who I think do know what they're talking about. And I think that the markets work. Producers respond to supply. That includes energy markets. If things settle down, and if the war ends in Ukraine, and Europe is in a better position to use Russian gas as they see fit, or as energy investments come back, we always hope for things to settle down, but you never know what's around the corner.
Well, since you're a government agency at the Federation, right, you can handle all that for us, right?
Yeah, except we're not, of course.
Except, I say that with a smile.
Yeah.
Doctor,
and let me say another thing about Farm Bureau. Farm Bureau is really is a grassroots organization. Things come from the bottom up. Some folks have made some allegations. Some people like to talk about Farm Bureau being big agriculture. Our members are average size farms. We represent more small farms than anybody. Our members are typical farmers. They are farmers. They're not typical in the sense that they're leaders. Our members and our leaders are remarkable people, but they represent the interests of farmers. Our policies that we carry to Congress, they begin at the grassroots. They begin at a county farm bureau meeting. Most of our policies begin as a resolution that some farmer brings to a county farm bureau meeting, and they debate it, they discuss it, and they say, we'd like to see that happen. And then they bring it up to the state. The state has a resolutions committee, and they discuss it. Then their state delegates will decide whether or not they want to pass that along to the national organization. And if they do, if they approve it and they send it up to us, there's another process like that, and it gets approved by a delegation of farmers. And so everything we do comes from the farmers and is approved by the farmers and decided on by the farmers and moves forward. We provide our support. We do whatever they ask us to do to support their understanding of things. They are constantly asking questions. They are reading our market intels. They're looking for us to help be part of the conversation, to understand what's going on. But they are the experts. Ultimately, they make the decisions, and we care about it. In my opinion, it's a remarkable organization, and I'm proud to be here.
Well, and Doctor, you said it so well. I still remember as a young man in the small town of Humboldt, Iowa, and it may be 30 below zero or it may be 100 degrees, and having the honor of spending a lot of time with my friends that lived on the farm, worked on the farm, and worked so hard 24/7. I do think, as I mentioned earlier, that sometimes it's taken for granted. Safeway needs the farmers. We need the farmers, and we need your organization. And I applaud you and the American Farm Bureau Federation for all that you're doing and to help the world. It's truly an honor for you to be a part of our Politics Aside today. Chief Economist with your crystal ball, and I'm glad to hear you say that prices are going to come down, it's going to get easier, and there's no problems, right? And again, I say that with a smile, but you have your finger on the pulse of what's going on. So I want to thank you, Doctor. It's a real pleasure. My best to your organization and to all of you that have tuned into Politics Aside. Please join us again in the future. If you have any ideas or topics you'd like us to talk about, please let us know. Again, my goal is to introduce all of you to some of the best and the brightest of national leaders and some international leaders. So with that, please enjoy your holiday season, Thanksgiving. Please be safe, and look forward to seeing you again soon, Doctor. All the best.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.